Hey there, fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and this week we are doing something very non-traditional, but also still very traditional in a weird roundabout way. We are prepping a canvas so you can paint on it with watercolors. Stick around. So as some people might say, there both are and aren't some pretty hard and fast rules when it comes to working with art materials. Things like don't mix oil and acrylic, don't try to paint watercolors on a surface other than paper. But as long as you know your materials well enough, you can do things that are considered very untraditional and break a lot of those rules. So in the process of breaking rules, I found a method to take a stretched canvas, prep it properly, and be able to paint on it with watercolors. So I'm going to teach you that method today. So I've started things out with a piece of stretcher bar with some freshly stretched canvas. This is completely unprimed, so I'm going to start with a simple primer layer. Now, if you're just buying a canvas from the store, you can jump ahead to the next step, but it's important to do an initial primer gesso coat to start. Now this can be done with gesso. It can also be done with something like GAC 100, which is a fluid acrylic medium, which would, mostly what we're looking for is to making sure the surface is nice and taut and sealed before we do any kind of additional prep on top of that. However, I'm actually going to be opting for some Liquitex's clear gesso. There's a handful of companies that make clear gesso. I like Liquitex's one quite a lot, specifically because it's a little bit more fluid and it comes in a bottle and it's easy to handle that way. So I am just treating this like any other raw canvas and just, layering out a, layer of that gesso. I like the clear gesso in particular, especially for prepping canvases on occasion, because once it dries, it will retain this color of the canvas texture rather than being, white, black, or some tint or shade. Liquitex's clear gesso also adds a notable tooth to the overall first primer layer, even second primer layer of any given canvas. And for that reason, I find that, especially going into what will be a mixed media ground, essentially, to use for the watercolors, it's a little bit more effective for gripping the next upper layer that I'm going to be applying. Okay, so while obviously the gesso will need a couple hours to dry, in that time, I do want to talk a little bit about the medium that is specifically required to be able to paint watercolors on canvas. Enter Golden's Fine Pumice Gel. Now, I will say up front that I don't really like making videos which specifically call out products that are somewhat exclusive. I like to try to make my tutorials more universal in that way, but in terms of this particular product, there's really nothing else that is even remotely comparable that does the same thing. Now, this is what is known as a pumice stone or sand medium. This particular stuff is ground to extremely fine particles. As a result, the overall final finish is like a very, very, very fine sandpaper. Now, other companies make stone and sand-esque mediums, but pretty much every single one of them creates a surface texture which is much grittier than is even really possible to work with, especially as a ground. For this reason, I will say that the fine pumice gel is an absolute must for this. Obviously, you don't need an entire gallon of it. They sell it in 8-ounce jars, so get yourself one of these. Okay, per usual, the first layer of gesso takes a lot less time to dry than I always think it does because it's absorbing into the weave of the canvas. So we are actually dry now, and it's only been about an hour. I'm going to start applying some of this fine pumice gel. Just on its own, it's just this fairly thick, almost the same viscosity as a heavy body paint, but it's this bit of a gray color, and it'll dry a little bit more translucent to hopefully slightly more transparent with what we've got here today. So on a small palette, I'm going to go ahead and mix out a nice big scoop of this. I'm going to be dipping my brush in some water, but not really mixing with the water so much as just keeping the bristles wet. I'm also going to mix a little bit of the GAC 100 into this as well, just to help overall smoothness. Now, if you are jumping ahead or have jumped ahead from the part where we had to gesso this much, and they're just using a store-bought canvas, at this point in time, I would recommend doing a light sanding of whatever canvas you happen to have bought. A light sanding of your canvas will allow the pumice gel to absorb in a little bit better. I don't necessarily have to do that step because I have enough tooth and buildup of the natural use and weave of the canvas that I have prepped already. But if you are using a store-bought canvas, which tend to have a little bit more of a smoother, even waxier surface when you first take them out of the package, you might want to give it a little bit of a sanding first. Now from the side angle, as you can see, I've got a decent amount of liquid there. I'm not going crazy with it, but I'm just looking to keep it relatively thin. And we're just going to apply this as we would a layer of gesso. The one thing I would note for this is when applying the pumice gel, make sure you are actually covering all of the surface. You don't want it to be too thin, but you also don't want it to be so thick that you end up having big lumps and canyons and mountains of sculpted medium on your particular surface. Or who knows, maybe you do. Maybe you want to actually work with that kind of texture. But again, since we're going to be applying eventually watercolor to this, it's better to stick with something that is going to be a lot smoother in terms of how it applies. Seem to have some leftover paint on this palette that's working its way into the weave and into the medium here, but that's quite all right. We're going to be covering it with paint later anyway. Now I will note, if you are not starting from raw canvas as I have today, you will likely want to do multiple coats of the pumice gel. In this instance, I will only need one. However, for a traditional store-bought canvas, you will likely need at least 2 coats with a sanded layer in between to be sure that you are getting a distinctly even and well-distributed coat of the gel medium. I may even do a second coat myself. Just want to be sure all of those edges are covered. And of course, this is entirely optional, but just the way I paint, I also take care of my edges. This will allow you to do a complete wraparound with watercolor or whatever medium you happen to choose. Yeah, just based on how I'm seeing this absorbing into the canvas, I will absolutely be putting a second coat of the pumice gel on here. But for now, I do need to let that dry. I would like to add that because the fine pumice gel medium does contain those particles, it is imperative that you wash your brush really, really well to be sure that stone does not stay within your bristles long term. Okay, well, it's been quite a few hours now, and our canvas is completely dry, prepped, and almost ready to go for watercolors. One thing I do recommend is hitting this with a very light sandpaper. It's probably something no rougher than, I would say, maybe a 150 to 200 grit. This is a block that's actually a 320, which is going to give me just a little bit of a lightness to the touch to get rid of any of the really, really rough points of this. It's, as you can probably hear, a little bit rough, but I just want to make it a little bit closer to a paper smoothness. And because we did 2 coats for this, the bit of sanding that I'm doing here shouldn't affect lifting on any of that pumice gel layers off. I'm just kind of smoothing them out. And of course, use your own judgment for how rough or smooth you like it.
Oh my.
And just like that, you're ready to paint. A fully prepared watercolor canvas, now in this case, is capable of pretty much any water technique that you could think of. Whether you're doing heavy washes with out of the tube color and things that require quite a lot of water, or if you're a more detail-oriented painter, doing more stuff with reactivation of dried watercolors, everything is definitely possible with a prepared canvas for watercolor. Now it's important to note, because it's not paper, your dry times might vary a little bit depending on your painting environment. They might be a little bit more or a little bit less, so just kind of know that going in. Probably not the best idea to start with a larger canvas. Try this out on a smaller one before you do something a bit bigger. So that is how you take canvas and prep it to paint on it with watercolor. Golden's Fine Pumice Gel. I talk about it all the time here on this channel, and it's just one of the many, many reasons why I love the material so much. You can prep just about anything with that stuff, not just canvas, and paint watercolor or use it for any kind of mixed media project. That little bit of tooth it gives you, plus the translucency and extra absorbency to the whole thing, means that you can prep anything with it, including canvas, and paint on it with watercolor. As always though, I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna blow some minds in this one for a lot of people thinking that there's no way this would ever be possible. Turns out it is. If you know your materials and you experiment enough, you can do pretty much whatever you want in art, including breaking a few rules. As always though, if you enjoyed this, learned something, or just love hearing me talk about paint and art supplies, go ahead and hit that like button. Let me know your thoughts in comments below. Check me out on the socials in the description box below, including a community Discord, which I'm trying to get more involved with, to sign up for my usually monthly newsletter on my website, as well as places to check out my personal art online. But for all that stuff, thanks guys for watching, keep on creating, stay inspired, and I'll see you guys next time.